You know, you've got different pipes. We have concrete pipes in the ground. We have ductile iron pipes. We have plastic pipes. They don't last forever. I mean, you're talking maybe some ductile iron pipes have survived a couple hundred years, but for the most part, you're talking 75 to 100 years. And so there's usually roads on top of those pipes. And so when you go down to dig up a pipe and replace it, then you're dealing with the road too. There's other folks that are in the public right of way. A lot of you that are sitting at the table, you know, have private and, you know, like electric lines or gas lines or cable or fiber optic and things like that. And so there needs to be this coordination effort too, which is a lot of what Michigan was talking about. You know, I guess long-term planning is what I'm really pushing for. And so at this point, we used to take our 5-year plan and basically it was the roads that were guiding whatever we were going to do. When we come into a neighborhood, anytime you're doing construction in a neighborhood, no matter how well you're planning, and Gene knows this, you know, with whether you're detouring folks or you're closing roads down, whatever you're doing, even if you're leaving traffic open to their homes or the properties, it's still going to have an impact. It's going to have a financial impact on those folks. I know the McDonald's owner real well in Egan. One summer we were doing a project. We left access open to his place. He still lost $30,000 over the 1 month, you know, of construction. That's one restaurant, you know. So we try and go in all at one time and whatever. And if we're going to be in a neighborhood, we do everything, you know. So we try and coordinate that with private utility companies, but we're doing all our utility work as well as our street work too. And so right now, or up until this point, the streets have been guiding that because every 20 years we have to touch the streets. Well, Egan's not real old, but we've been around, you know, since I guess 50s and 60s is when we really started doing some construction. So we're having to start to look at replacing some of those pipes. And we're recognizing that, well, I don't want to reconstruct a road and then 5 years later, 10 years later, tear it all up and replace the sewer pipe that I should have thought about because I knew how long it was there for the most part.
And then is Excel doing any work in that same area?
Yep, exactly.
Or, you know, other CenturyLink or whatever.
And I don't want to give Excel a 24-hour notice or a 48-hour notice, or honestly, I don't even want to give them a 6-month notice. I want to give them a 2, 5, you know, we're talking years of notice, you know, so so we're trying to do that internally for our own, you know, getting our utility folks to work with our street folks, which works well. I mean, we don't have any issues with that, but then going beyond that, you know, and working with the private utilities as well. And then, you know, sometimes our streets intersect with state streets, our state highways, our county highways. And then we need to coordinate with those folks. And then our utilities are underneath the county, all the county highways in town. We have public or city utilities in, and then sometimes we cross through state highways as well. So, you know, so there's a lot of that planning for all those variety of different, what I call assets, you know, the different infrastructure, but it's not just about us, it's about, you know, the private folks too. And then also always looking out for the public, you know, the general public and trying to do what's in their best interest. So long-term, if we can come up with a long-term plan, even if, and I don't know if this is a gentleman that was here last time, but some folks share concerns about, well, you're going to spend all this money. And like in Egan right now, we're increasing our utility rates and started this last year to start paying for improvements 50 years, 75 years out. So we're starting to build up our savings account, you know, so we can do that. So the folks 75 years from now don't take that big hit, you know, because, you know, a lot, what the folks that live in Egan now, for the most part, and are going into newer homes, all that, everything was built up for them. You know, they're a benefit of that. They're a benefit of the awesome highway systems that we have in Dakota County, the awesome county highways we have as well. You know, well, somebody paid for that beforehand. And so we're just kind of continuing that same philosophy moving forward. So does that help?
Yeah, it really, Jim. Go ahead, anybody.
Well, I want to add to what Russ said. I'm an engineer too. And one of the things that engineers think about, it kind of like, you know, lawyers think differently than most people, and engineers think differently. And one of the things that we think about is fixing things. And that might be fixing things after they break, but then it's fixing things before they break too. And I have history that goes way beyond Russ's. And so I lived in Egan my entire life. And I grew up on a farm there, and we didn't have city water. We didn't have city sewer. We didn't have any of that. And we worked, my family worked with the city. And I don't know if Russ knows all this history, but we worked with the city. The biggest development that happened in Egan was putting in a UNIVAC building. And they bought an entire square mile. And, now, they became Lockheed Martin and all sorts of other things. And now it's a shopping center. But there's a water tower near there that is now a, what would you call it?
Telecommunications.
It's a communications center, but it doesn't hold water anymore. It's more of a,
5G
a
tower.
Christmas tree. And when we developed our farm, we prepaid because we didn't have an engineering group that was in Egan. We had a contract engineering company, and we worked with them to figure out where the water pipes were gonna go, where the sewer pipes were gonna go. And my dad he was lots of different jobs in his life, but he said, I want to have city water in our development. And he went to the engineer that was, and this was Rosine, and we paid, I don't remember what the total was. I think it was somewhere around $37,000 back in 1967 to bring water from that water tower south about 4 miles to Dipley and Pilot Knob. And then we hooked up to it. And so our development had city water. We also figured out where the sewer was going to come through. And so when mainline sewer came through, it came to the elementary school on Thomas Lake Road, Thomas Lake Elementary. We already had our sewage plan all laid out so that it went to that corner. We had a sewage treatment plant that we were running ourselves. Our family was running it. And then sewage treatment plant, you could drink the water out of a sewage treatment plant. And we also, my dad said, God, I don't like these wires. I want to have underground electricity. And he had to arm wrestle with we had 2 services for Egan. One of them was the former NSP, and the other one was Dakota Electric. And Dakota Electric agreed to put in underground wire. So we had underground wiring, we had city water, city sewer, all because we worked with the services that were available. And the people in Egan, our first mayor had the vision to be able to support that and support it when we were just a township.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that that's the kind of thinking that we have to do in this group here, is do it for all of Minnesota. That, I think Russ is probably somewhat responsible for putting conduit into the streets, where when we have to run more fiber, we can push it through the conduit. That's an amazing thought, to do that planning ahead of time. And we have been, I think, very fortunate in our city, and it's one of the reasons why it's so livable and so desirable. So yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that I think about when I think about what this committee should do here, is to think about what's happening, where the technology is going, and how can we take advantage of the things that are new today that are going to be common in the future.
And folks online, please feel free to speak up when you have if you have an idea or want to add to the conversation. One of the things, I think a lot of us were at that infrastructure, the like LIUNA thing, and one of the breakout sessions, they talked about site development and how a lot of companies and folks that want to locate to Minnesota, it's really about making sure that those sites are developed prior to the company coming in here, because they want to know that they have the infrastructure available to spur that economic growth too. And so I kind of think about it as site development, and was a little bit curious. Oh, I just had something come into my memory and then it just went away. So I guess the question is, if we're, or, like, the long-term planning seems to be one of the big themes that we need across there. So who are the people that we need at the table? And like, what are I was just looking at this, this Colorado Department of Local Affairs, and they serve as, it says the Department of Local Affairs serves as the primary interface between state and local communities. They provide financial support to local communities and professional technical services to community leaders. And so I was like, well, that sounds really good. They kind of do a little bit more on the property tax side. It's a kind of a strange, I'm not quite sure what their main goals are, but it's on the property tax side. So oh yeah, go ahead.
Member Paulson online.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in too. Good afternoon, everyone. Fascinating story about Egan, and I'm gonna elaborate a little further on it. The challenges we face ties back to that example in a pretty amazing way. 1967, fast forward 56 years to today. Russ knows this, that some of that infrastructure put in then, the roads and pipes and different things may have been replaced over time. You look at that infrastructure built in 1967, 50 years from now, it'll have to be replaced again. That's just one part of town. The new development that's occurring today in other parts of communities, that infrastructure will have to be replaced in 50 years, or the roads, pipes in 100. And then all the development that happens between now and 50 years from now, you know, it just, the systems continue to grow and build. As we see growth and expansion continue, resources become even more critical the farther down the road we look. So just the timing of it, the length of time, it's easy to understand why there's so many problems and challenges associated with funding and balancing those needs and those requirements to be able to continue to deliver those services in a safe and efficient way. Planning for 50 years out is the way it has to occur. Asset management and those types of things have to happen for us to do that efficiently. So I think at the timing, it seems like a long period of time, but in the scheme of a city, business just continues to move on. You know, the things we do on a daily basis and an annual basis, and planning is an important part of that. Planning for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years for wastewater plants, those types of things. I mean, we're talking huge periods of time, but on the big scheme of things, it comes up on you pretty quick. And we balance the needs of today with the needs of tomorrow and, you know, many years from now. So I thought it was a great example. I think it's kind of sheds a little light on how we get to where we are, while at the same time helping us to understand, well, geez, why didn't we start planning for this stuff 50 years ago and start raising rates 50 years ago, so that when it comes to pay the piper down the road, it's not such a big shock to them, or it's not something that's going to basically bury your community in debt. So it certainly is a challenge. And I think it's a great example, the timing of it. Just what was once as a farm was Lockheed Martin turns into a shopping center. All those things have different impacts and effects on how you plan for that and make those improvements. So and I think it all ties together with infrastructure, both private and public. Those are the challenges that are in front of us. And yes, certainly it takes a lot of coordination and an organization to be able to do that effectively. We're talking hundreds of Minnesota communities and thousands of businesses and hundreds of thousands of residents impacted by these things. So yeah, this conversation is certainly an important one, and I think that's definitely going in the right direction. But yeah, those viewpoints are important to help understand the context of it. And I appreciate what, you know, that Egan tie, that's a great example to build off. Just wanted to share that. Thanks.
I just wanted to mention that, you know, Egan is a great example. Can you hear me all right? I suppose I should do that. Egan's a great example. Probably because of the forethought, Egan had the resources and now has the resources to continue to do that. There are tremendous number of communities that do not have those resources,
Mhm.
especially when you get outside the metro area.
Mhm.
I think there's a nexus there between strategic planning at the local level, meaning city, township level, in conjunction with the county,
Mhm.
all right? And then there, you would ask the question about who else should be a part of that. Obviously, it's Public Works, right, at that local level. If you're talking resilience, just with infrastructure in mind, you know, the DNR and groups like that, soil and water conservation, your county extension office, right? If you're talking about more than that, then maybe your county health and others. But you can't forget the emergency management side of it. Just because emergency management brings some mitigation to the table. Mitigation, for the most part, the mitigation programs that we have available are based upon, the projects are based upon the 5-year mitigation plan that each county puts together. The jurisdictions within those counties, all they have to do is adopt the county plan. For Minneapolis and St. Paul, that means that they've got to get along with their counties, and I'll leave that where that is. But the point is, there is some capability there on the mitigation side. If you have a strategic plan, and part of that strategic plan, you've incorporated some of those projects, some of those mitigation projects that you want to do anyway. And then you have a disaster come along that's declared, and now there's funding available to actually go ahead and do that project. It's better than, you know,
Continuing to do the,
right,
the
right.
reactive
It
stuff.
helps to move that ball forward. So I would just add that in from an emergency management standpoint. You need to have your county emergency management folks involved in that. Yes, ma'am.
So I'd love to just piggyback off that really quick, Brian. When you talk about emergency management, it also makes me think of our local fire departments,
Mhm.
you know, as well, because they're the ones also, you know,
Yep.
if there is a disaster, be it, you know, flooding or anything else.
Trained around, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. I think of infrastructure and just resiliency as well as how do we maintain or continue to help support locally our fire departments that are lacking space, you know, volunteers. There's, you know, in the rural greater Minnesota, volunteers are very hard to, you know, they're volunteer firefighters and EMS support. So I think about that as well, and what a role they play in serving our communities. And I mean, and I don't know if that's just too organic to talk about it, but I'm like, they're so just pivotal in our community to even help from going into you know, care facilities, you know, and it could be 400 calls, could be 500 calls or more a year that they're responding to everything. And I think about that and how having a voice or just some support around them too would be
Right.
huge in this process. Because it does impact, and again, as we're doing a lot of transportation things around the state, working on roads, our bridges are, you know, probably hitting the peak of their life, a lot of bridges, and that's transportation, but then how people navigate around these road closures then impact our township roads. They impact, you know, people going to and from work, and I think like having a real cool picture and a way to communicate. That's something that stuck out to me, like with Michigan, is there was a lot of great communication. You talk about Egan, like, okay, if we're gonna do this, then we're gonna, so it's figuring out how can you get along, because there's differing views just sitting at this table on what we think probably impacts this task force. Or when you talk about going for, it's not kind of a one size fits all Minnesota, but it's more of like, how do we serve Minnesota well? And I think it's by being very transparent. And it's by having foresight and having, you know, goals, but understanding, again, there's communities that they can't even, I mean, I have a community in my district that their water, if you were told to drink that water and you could see what it looked like, there'd be no way that you drink the water or put your brand new baby in the bathtub with that water, but they're doing it. And they're trying to figure out ways just to, that's wastewater, you know, like wastewater and their regular drinking water. It's wild, so. Anyway,
I'm Lyle Femright. I actually represent the Township Association. However, my full-time job is I work for a consulting engineering firm and have for over 55 years. My career started on I-94, original construction from Osakis to Fergus Falls when it was being graded. That's where I started my career in public works. And I can echo Russ's comments about municipalities. And I've worked in probably dozens and dozens of outstate communities. The need's different than here.
Right.
These communities are 100, almost 200 years old. We have pipes in the ground that are shot. Let's be really honest. They're shot. And the needs are so much different there. I hear 50-year-old communities here. That's small potatoes compared to the outstate. And that's what we have, because we're working in these communities, replacing stuff that you wonder how it's even operated up until now. So those needs, as Russ alluded to, are significant. I mean, we cannot have communities if we don't have sewer, water, and streets. It won't exist. So those are high priority areas. Another thing you got to understand about the townships is the townships have more miles of road in the state of Minnesota than all the other roads combined, MnDOT, county, city. And you ask, what do they serve?
Mhm.
That's where our food comes from.
Mhm.
Up and down all those township roads are access for food and residents who live along there. But the big problem we have is up north. Everybody goes up north for tourism, fishing, hunting, recreation, camping, canoeing. Those township roads in most cases are gravel. They cannot withstand the rigorous activities that go on throughout the year. I have been on the legislative committee for Township Association for probably going on 15 or 20 years now. And I'm gonna say, we don't get funding from the state. I'm sorry to report that we don't get hardly anything. It's sad when you talk about having more roads than the rest of the state organizations and we don't get funding. I mean, we get a little state aid. I figured in our township, we could buy maybe 10 loads of gravel. Well, what's that? That's nothing. I mean, we're falling so short on the supply chain for the townships associations. I'll give you an example. I'm on a town board chairman, south of Mankato. We lost our equipment a little over a year ago to a fire. Today, tomorrow we're getting delivery on a truck, a new truck that costs $400,000. We have a new blade coming in January. That's $430,000. I mean, those two items alone exceed our budget twice. So my point is that future generations on townships do not have the resources to buy this stuff. I mean, these are huge expenditures. I mean, it's different for the state that can budget, but and we're a pretty proactive township. And you get up in some of those, they're still working on an $80,000 a year budget. I mean, they're just barely getting gravel on the road. We have a huge shortfall on what's needed. And you alluded to fire departments. Fire departments up north are in big trouble. Funding wise and volunteers. and people want to live there and people want to go up there and have recreation. They would expect people to show up if there's a fire. Well, you know, they come out with that 1962 fire truck that, you know, maybe pumps water. I mean, these are big concerns and we're falling short. And it's a good thing we're here because go and talk to one of the communities I work in and talk about resilience, and they're saying, gosh, we're just barely getting by.
Yes.
And I'm quite sure that's true in many of the metro communities as well. We've got to be more than reactive. When you think back to 1957, when Eisenhower passed the bill to build the interstates across this country, the biggest expenditure ever made in the history of the world, and we have a hard time getting a mile of road approved from the landowners to get it built. I'm sure Russ has gone through some public hearings where there's opposition and here we're sitting as a state and we're wondering, you know, how we're going to spend money. It's going to take a lot of money.
Mhm.
So, you know, I'm here to, you know, roll up the sleeves and get moving.
Who needs to be at the I mean, as far as the townships and, I was just kind of I started putting together a list of like the public entities and private entities that were, you know, that need to be part of this planning process. I think that's kind of where I'm hearing is that we need long-term strategic planning. One of the questions I have then is long-term strategic planning for what though? You know, so like, are we looking at, you know, what are those assets that we want to bunch together to make sure that we're strategically planning together on? And one of the,
I have a comment.
go ahead, yep.
Hi, Chris Manderfeld. I'm the utility director for the New Ulm Public Utilities, but I'm here under the capacity of the Minnesota Municipal Utilities. And so I just wanted to add on to what the gentleman prior to me speaking, you know, he did mention about the outstate municipals, and that really is what I'm here representing. And he's very true on a lot of that. Many of the municipal utilities were founded right around the same time. And from my day job as the director of utilities, we're in the process of doing a asset or infrastructure analysis. And we're doing that for each one of our utilities. And I represent electric, gas, water, and wastewater. And, you know, what we're finding, like many utilities around the state, is that our infrastructure is at its end of life. And so, for example, we just did a study on our wastewater treatment plant, and come to, you know, the study's completed and we've got about $145 million worth of improvements that have to be made. Our plant was built in 1972. And, you know, back in the day, that plant was funded with 90% of it was funded by grants from the EPA. And so now you come back, you know, 50 years from now, and that plant is is going to cost, you know, 10 times that, and very little funding is available. And I think that that's what a lot of, you know, outstate utilities are seeing, that, you know, there's so much that has to be done, whether it's water pipes that are in the ground that are from the early 1900s to, you know, we have a power plant that's, you know, 100 years old. There's just so much to be done. And to be, like another gentleman said, to be proactive rather than reactive, it's very difficult. So I just wanted to add that as a point from the municipal standpoint.
Thank you. Go ahead online again.
John Paulson, once again, thanks. I think people at the table, you have a pretty solid cross section of kind of what you're looking at as far as needing to be part of that conversation into the future. state agencies for sure, DNR, MDH, MPCA, others, deed, as far as there's all kinds of needs regarding that interconnection between utility needs and growth in this communities tied to regulatory requirements, tied to housing and, daycare. And I mean, this can sprinkle and spread into all kinds of different components. The hardest part that I see is how do you keep it in a manageable size group? How do you get the right people in the room to represent enough people to actually get this pointed in the right direction and keep it on the tracks? That's the challenge. You could have group of 20 city people just brainstorming around trying to understand these different dynamics just to report back to one. You almost need subcommittees. I don't know how else you do it. I mean, there is some of that already that exists within the different agencies, within cities, within counties, within townships. It's just articulating that to a larger group, perhaps. I think that might be the best approach. Like I said, some of that structure already exists behind the scenes. I think there's, like I said, a cross section of some of these folks in the room today on the Zoom call. Like I said, I think that's what you have to do. You need the representation from all those affected parties to be able to understand the needs, understand the concerns and the challenges, and then ultimately somehow, pull all those thoughts back into a larger, a more condensed, smaller group to have a larger discussion about it. That's in lies the challenge. There's so many different things that we need to try to figure into these conversations, because what about climate change? What about resiliency associated with every one of these things? What are the impacts of all of that on this as well? To get back kind of to the original core of this is, how do we build more resilient infrastructure with limited resources that we have to serve our communities, to serve our state for the next 50 to 100 years and beyond? I mean, ladder trucks $1 million plus now. We're talking fire departments. I mean, some fire departments they would literally all just throw their hands in the air and say, well, what are we doing? I mean, how do you manage something like that if you're talking a small little city that needs something like that? I mean, it's just overwhelming. And that's just one example. But I think, the people at the table, the people represented as part of this group is a really great cross section. I'd start there. Are we missing something? Is there anyone that's not here? Or is there an organization or a component of this that's missing? I think this is a good starting point. But for, whatever that looks like into the future, if that's a commission of some sort, like you said, I think you referenced Colorado earlier and what they're doing and how they're building that nexus between state agencies and communities. And, I think there's a number of different ways to do it, but I think, the biggest struggle is going to be trying to keep it manageable.
Right. Number one. And then I think number two, through our committee work, one of the things that Michigan seemed to kind of keep above is politics. And I think that's the one thing that, during this whole process, during the legislative session, I kept going back and forth between like the climate change, the climate cabinet, or, is it private, who is going to be the ones that are the ones making the decisions? And, I didn't feel like if we set up the climate cabinet as like this infrastructure council, then it would be a purely political process. And so that's where I was really like thinking about this public-private kind of, I don't know, divide, or, who's making the decisions and then who is guiding those decisions, I guess. But then I think the thing that we need to think about first before we decide about who's making decisions and what they're making decisions on. So, I was kind of thinking the overall mission, it sounds like, is really strategic planning around assets and asset management. Is that what I'm getting? Go ahead, online.
Hi, this is Jessica with the Department of Commerce. I'm just trying to wrap my head around everything I'm hearing today and some of what I've heard the last couple of meetings. And does this task force have any funding behind it? I mean, it seems to me that we may need some outside assistance to come in and help us do some mapping around, we talk about that we have a good cross section of people here. There's decision making that happens at different levels, at the local, the state, even regional level. It may be worth us considering how we map out some of these different, who's who, statutes, rules, funding constraint, hopes, fears, dreams, all of that kind of stuff that I'm just hearing at a really high level that could help us navigate this conversation. I worry a little bit that we could very quickly start getting into some circular discussions about constraints without being able to identify the levers that move us forward. And I think, what kind of triggered this thought was the discussion around, well, who makes all these decisions? Untold numbers of decisions go into any of this. And so it may be worth us considering somebody that, and all of us, I'm guessing, have very full plates with the rest of our jobs, that having somebody come in and help us do a little mapping may help advance the conversation to get us to a place where we can actually make recommendations on how to move forward.
Can I just say one quick thing? Thank you for sharing that. And I think the ultimate goal too is to come up with a report, right?
Yep.
At the end of this time. So then we can get guidance and move forward with bringing things to the legislature. I mean, like, that's ultimately I think the goal is to figure that piece out. And as I'm looking at just again through the notes on, what the different departments or different folks sitting at the table here and online, even just talking about what is resiliency, sustainability, things like that. I do like the idea of mapping things out or having a compass just to help guide us. But when you're starting to talk about, $1 million to do one chunk of road, or, $1 million for a fire department, or this, all these different things, you just start throwing zeros behind things. It could be very overwhelming. And so I do like the idea of just seeing who's sitting at the table. How do we navigate things if it's subcommittees coming up with plans, and then just how to communicate that so we can get that in a report that would actually make sense and help Minnesota versus being confusing.
When I wrote down a couple of things here, and I heard early on, where are we going with new technology? And that's very important, whether it's automobiles or transportation or anything like that. But my next thing I wrote down was, what are the needs? I mean, I think if we don't identify the needs, I mean, it's great to be resilient and have all those things going, but I'm just speaking in terms of townships. There's huge needs. And if none of those needs even get met in our work here, then it's all for naught. And not that we're gonna come up with the dollars and cents, but there has to be some point where the needs get connected to the legislature for dollars and cents. Otherwise, we might be just spinning our wheels here.
And I think, I know there's another comment online. The thing that is frustrating as a legislator, being up here now for a few years, and Senator Carlson's been here a little bit longer than me, is how many times we get bills for planning and development or studies. And to me, that feels like, one of the first things that I did when I came into the legislature was get $1 million funding study to look at Highway 65. Well, we're finally, got that funded now, and it's going to be built in a few years. But imagine, if instead of every year the legislature having, or, the city of Blaine having to come up and beg for, funds for 65, if they could come up and say, here's our plan. This is what we need. We don't need the $1 million study. We already know what the goals of the state are up front. We know what is gonna help this project get moved along, and here you go. This is how we're gonna, meet that goal. And so, and then I think that better positions us as legislators to fund it. But then also I think one of the key thing that we've been hearing around the room is the resources. We know resources are scarce. And so, how do we make sure that we're, when I wrote down equipment co-ops. Like, is that something one of the bills I did this year was for the NLX, and part of it was to get Minnesota into a Midwest passenger pool co-op type of thing, where we go in with a bunch of other states and buy a bunch of train cars. Is that something that is feasible for smaller communities? Is there ways that we can start to pool resources or build projects upon one another? And I think, how are we gonna, when I was looking at this Colorado thing, is the interface between state and local government. And I was like, well, I feel it's like a customer service almost, we need to be that customer to the rest of this, to the locals, the utilities, the municipals, and make sure that the product that we're getting them is the best possible one that they can have. And, it's not a $9 griddle from Target or Black Friday. Online. Bree?
Yeah, hi, Bree Mackey. I represent DEED, so that name has been brought up, but also the Office of Broadband Development. So I think one thing I just wanted to comment on when I think about this task force, and then also the governor has a task force on broadband as well. And so as an agency and as the Office of Broadband Development, we rely on a group of 15, much like all of us, to help provide directive to the governor and all of you legislators that are, as you were just saying, to help guide our work and what is needed and bringing the collaboration. So when I think about this group, that would be my hope, is that we are also providing that sort of collaborative information that can, help guide work into the future. I also just wanted to point out, when it comes to all of this discussion, is like literally right now we are in a planning phase with the federal dollars for $652 million under the IIJA broadband equity, access, and deployment. And so we have a plan that we're currently developing to make sure that everybody gets broadband access in Minnesota. So when I think about that, and also just brought up about that planning, is this plan should not be a plan that sits on the shelf for 5 years. It needs to be deployable, and we have to deploy it now. So I think my point of all that is we have statutory rules that we carry in Minnesota based on our state programs, but also I have these rules under the federal government to make these actions happen now. And in the next 5 years, getting infrastructure to everywhere. And so any opportunity, and I like the idea of sort of, somebody coming, hiring a consultant, what are all our needs? What are all our requirements? What are we all charged with, because we're all super busy, and put that to paper so that we can all see that, because I'm not going to be able to get this work done without SHPO, DNR, transportation, many of you in the room, without all of us acknowledging and collaborating. So that's my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. But I don't have time to wait around either. So, and that's on the Fed. So like, I just, it's just like a lot happening, like all of us are. And then the last thing with that is we are also doing digital opportunity planning. And so then making sure that all of you help me utilizing the tools that we have to make sure that Minnesota is utilizing the broadband and whatever it is, because you all have it too, to the full potential that people want to do it. So anyway, that's what I have.
Thank you. Jim, you had a.
Yeah, it's just, I'm the new person, so I'm soaking all of this in, and obviously hearing a lot of conversations, around funding. Conversations about, having to react to situations, communication, coordination needs, forward thinking and all of that. And I think each of us, we have processes that we all use to kind of navigate those things. I think one of the challenges, and it maybe gets to the point Jessica was making too, is terms of our work here. How do we take our experiences in these different areas and try to, put in some framework where we get a tangible outcome in terms of recommendations, as a group. And I think, when I think about all of the planning that utilities do now, investor-owned utilities and, one co-op, but we interact with the Public Utilities Commission. So we have a state entity. And of course, we interact with several state agencies as well. The Department of Commerce is really an important one, as well as the PCA and others. So I think those processes, when we talk about regulatory efficiencies and things like that, we're really defenders of this regulatory structure that we use. We believe that it leads to better outcomes. I think maybe where we could do better is it can get kind of wonky. And we have public processes that we use, whether it's from the utility or from the Commerce Department or the Commission and such, but they're not necessarily accessible or known to folks outside the utility world. So we all know about them, but sometimes, how do you send that broader message? And so one of the things that we've tried to do as a company is designate some staff folks to work with local communities more directly. So for example, I did a stint as, our person who interfaced with the city of St. Paul. And so we'd meet annually with the Public Works Director and kind of go over to try to coordinate with water, with telecom, with our projects. And, we were going to do downtown St. Paul in 2025, and they were going to do it in 2024. We put our heads together and figured out how we do it together. So I think one of the questions as I'm listening to all this, and I'm
How do we
spinning around
formalize that?
is how do we invite more people into some of the structures we use, or is there a way to gain efficiencies in some of the approval process that we all use? Because I think conceptually they're probably pretty similar, but details matter. And I don't go before a city council necessarily. I know you probably spent a lot of time there, but you don't necessarily go before the Public Utilities Commission either. And we spend a ton of time there. So this is one of the questions I'm sort of grappling with as I'm listening to all of the challenges that we're laying out on the table.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges is like, what is the common goal? As far as, where do we all kind of overlap on it? And so, the one thing that I'm hearing is just, we really need to identify what is a, critical infrastructure. What are the things that we want to make sure we're collaborating on? And so I've just kind of, emergency, DNR, MnDOT, soil and water, public works, DOE, ag, townships, deed, housing, commerce, PUC, PCA. And then, I'm kind of thinking so who are some of the private, Excel, obviously, we'd have some of the utility companies and things like that. But
Well, I'm sort of wondering, just how we were named or identified in the statute when the bill was passed.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's a role for nuclear.
Yep.
Again, we're the only utility in Minnesota that operates nuclear power plants. And so that's all, there is a ton, trust me, a ton of planning that goes into that. And that does correspond with local government. We do joint exercises, we do all sorts of different things. And so I assume that is a topic of interest in terms of, recommendations going forward as well.
How do we upscale that? How do we expand it and upscale that process? So that we're including, public works and MnDOT and emergency. I'm sure you guys already talk with emergency services and DNR. We've saw, all sorts of stuff. Laura, you look like you have something to add. You're looking at me. Just because I talk too much, right?
No, thank you, Chair Cagle. Laura Ziegler with EGC. I was listening as I was listening to the conversation, and we have these recurring words listed at the bottom of the of the answers that we all provided on that handout. And I think some that could be on there, and maybe they are, and I missed them, because we've said them enough times today. It's coordination and communication, and that seems to be what everyone's looking for. So I think we can work a little bit backwards from there. Based on what we've heard from the previous presentation in Michigan, I think there's some ideas in which we could work backwards and utilizing technology, whether it's Dig Once, which I know Director Mackey is very familiar with. I know MnDOT is familiar with, things like that. But I think that seems to be a common goal.
Yeah.
And
And
that
the
seems to be the
mapping,
most
I-
common thing that we're hearing here today.
And that GIS mapping stuff was really interesting to me too. I think, you know, that if there would be, I'm wondering, like the mapping and then identification of problem points is something that I would like to see, but other folks, I know, you had a comment down there. Sorry, I kind of.
Yeah, we've been having kind of wide ranging conversation and so, you know, while I wanted to add some things, then by the time it got to me, we were off on other.
Oh,
things.
sorry.
So I just want to add a couple of other things. So I'm Dana Vanderbosch. I work at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and we work with communities who are looking for stormwater and wastewater infrastructure funds. And so a lot of what we hear, just a couple of additional things that I just want to add to the comments that have been made about small communities. That, you know, we started this whole conversation by talking about like, where are the barriers and where might a council or some kind of group help to move through those barriers. I agree with a lot of the comments that we've heard that the need is just overwhelming. And one of the things that I think wasn't expressly said, but is woven within those comments is just that smaller communities tend to be much more dependent on grant funding because they don't have like the population base to be able to raise their rates and to be able to kind of generate, you know, revenue that can be used on infrastructure that way. And so it's really important to have, you know, grant programs, not just like loans, like low interest loans are good for some regards, but they don't completely meet the need for a lot of small communities. I will also just point out that we see a lot of earmarks, both at the federal level and at the state level, where communities are successful working with a legislator and then they get a bill introduced for, you know, X million dollars for their specific project, which is great if you're a community who has that kind of a relationship with a legislator. But if you don't, then you're really dependent on other sources of funding that are more competitive in nature. And so that can be very difficult for small communities. And then the other thing I'll point out is just when you're working on an infrastructure package, even if it's just for, you know, one thing like your wastewater plant, you know, you have like a package of funding. And so you might be getting, you know, X dollars from this source and X dollars from this source and X dollars from that source. And it can be very difficult to get all of the funding to line up, to have like your whole package, you know, like come together and be available for, you know, the same length of time, et cetera, et cetera. And so just the way that you have to package money together to pay for a really expensive piece of infrastructure can just be challenging. And as I was listening to the Michigan Infrastructure Council talk, it sounded as if, you know, I mean, that's probably a problem, you know, in every state. But it sounded like they too were having difficulty getting all of these different threads of, you know, infrastructure funding to kind of align so that you could do a project and you're working on the street and the water and the sewer and the, you know, the wastewater, you're working on all these utilities at once. It can just be hard to get those
To
those
stack the
different
grants.
pieces to talk to each other. So I think we all understand that, and it was kind of implied in a lot of the comments, but I just wanted to mention a few things directly.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, Brian, so if I could just quickly add on to that, another thing that goes along with that in smaller communities and in the townships is a lot of the cases, they don't have necessarily full-time staff to do all that coordination that you're talking about to make sure all of that comes together at the same time. And oh, by the way, that township clerk or that city clerk has 5 or 6 other hats that they're wearing. And that may be an area, I don't know if the state can help with that or not, but that's it. We run into that on the emergency management side when we're doing disaster recovery. We run into that a lot with smaller jurisdictions. They really struggle just putting their packets together to get reimbursed for the damage that they're eligible to get reimbursed for.
Yeah,
Or
and that,
just-
That's a challenge, huge challenge.
Yeah, or just knowing like where do I go for certain kinds of funding and then applying for the funding.
Yeah.
And so the need for, I mean, we just call it technical assistance.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically people to help.
it's
these
their
communities.
consultants.
I mean, the need for that kind of technical assistance is just huge to work on a variety of different aspects
Yeah.
of this work.
So I just want to spin back to Laura and then come back around to the communication piece of it. So like when I look at it, like I'm just kind of like divvied it up in a pie, but when I'm thinking about it, I'm also thinking IT. Like, so it would be a website, a place where we would all be able to go and access. So it'd be a lot of, brains behind this IT piece of like a central location where people can go, they can look. I don't know how the Dig Once program, how that all works, but I can just see having to have framework around this, needing to have somebody that's really smart with coding and IT and, all that.
Portal.
Not
Yeah.
a
Mhm.
portal.
Yeah.
That's the word. That I was like trying to think of the word and I couldn't.
And
think
in
of it.
Michigan, they have theirs, but it's, only asset managers can access it. It's not open to the public, so it is, a guarded place.
I just think that'd be very, good, to have
The tool.
so in some part of that, I believe, I don't know if that's on the private side of it or when you're talking about your list of folks, but there'd have to be some type of IT for communication or a portal. I love that idea and just getting the word out. And that's huge. That's big money. That's a lot of things, but again, trying to figure out what's working in other states and what isn't. You think about driving in other states, food issues, supply chain issues. And just, what's happening around the world right now, but
So kind of some of so looking back at our agenda, so I'm kind of thinking like, what would be a mission statement? And so the four things that that just kind of popped out through this conversation is the planning. Having some sort of funding portal or funding pool. Where people or entities are able to, I go to the wildlife conservation or wildlife, I can't remember. But they have a tool where you can literally do a drop down and say, I'm a government entity. I want to, restore lake shore in this area. I have 20% matching funds and I, whatever. And then it'll pull up and it'll say, here are the grants that you are qualified to apply for. And so I'm like, oh, that, that would be so nice if our cities could just go there and say like, okay, we need wastewater and, where is that funding? But then at the same time, one of the things we did last session was the small communities program at the University of Minnesota. So really working with kind of like CTS, their, I can't remember the name, the School of Planning and Design, some other folks, and we got some money into that program to have the university actually go out and help with project development for some of these smaller communities and help with grant applications and tracking funding. And so I'm thinking, the thing that bugs me is the planning and design pieces of legislation. And so if we can have some sort of like project development where a community, one of the things that I really want to make sure that these are community driven projects too. So a community is the one, that comes to us and says, hey, this is the issue in our community. And then they come to this kind of clearinghouse, I guess, where then, us as the council or infrastructure council or whoever it may be, really digs into that problem and offers them actual solutions to those problems with some of our strategic goals in mind. Where, some of these small communities, let's say they have an intersection that's always backed up. Okay, let's put a light in. Well, what are some other things that we can do along that, what if we just design the road different? Would that, reduce accidents and what are some of the other layers of benefits we can put in there? And then really the fact is that, you can only use this money for certain things, like you were saying. And so how do we make sure that our locals are abiding by those grants? And like you said, some of them can't be used for, those money lanes, you have to stay in those money lanes. And if you get it out of those money lanes, the government doesn't really like it. And so how do we, make sure that we're compiling enough resources where an entire project can be met?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm just gonna respond to some of the things that have been said already before, but like with the assets, you asked about what kind of assets, what do we want to have on this list? And we
Right.
made a list, and I guess simplifying it to me, it's what impacts, what is important to quality of life in Minnesota? So those are the things that I think of. So it's like safe drinking water. And if I don't mention something on your list, I'm sorry, but electricity,
Mhm.
okay? Fiber to the premises, I think a lot of that may be important to a lot of us in Minnesota. Commerce, transportation, that's important to the success and the quality of life in Minnesota. But they're not all the same. They're not all equal, okay? I know working for a city that I'm not at the same level of priority as the police department or the fire department. I'm building the roads and I'm clearing the roads, and the police chief always reminds me, goes, Russ, your folks are the ones that are out there clearing the roads so we can get to have the emergency response that's so valuable and important and critical. So I get there's different priorities, and
Mhm.
I think Lyle laid out a very good, and he didn't go to a complete detail, but if you picked up on the examples that Lyle was sharing about the number of miles of township road and the cost for the replacement trucks and the graders, and someone else talked about the wastewater treatment plant. In 1972 Clean Water Act, okay, whole bunch of federal money went into most of our wastewater treatment plants in the state. Guess what? 50 years later,
Another input.
and there's no money to take care of any of them. So through all of this, and emergency management comes into it too, but through all of this, we need to prioritize. And I think that's the biggest, that's one of the most important things I think this group has to do, besides the communication. And I will say this, Excel and MnDOT have excellent examples of how they work with other agencies and communicate. And have the local representatives. So
What are
just
the
as
ones
examples,
that don't? Like,
who-
where do you have the biggest, like, what, when you're trying to get something off the ground, or, where are the, what agencies, what contact points do you have that are a little bit more difficult?
I don't know. I can make a list for you, or I
Okay.
can come up with some names. But I think to Lyle's point that he made before, I think for the legislature to see, and this would be an estimate, but and we did the lady from Mankato, I think, with the utilities, she's doing this infrastructure needs analysis. We did one in Egan for all our utilities 2-3 years ago. Excellent thing to do. But what it told us, it gave us a true picture of what our costs were for taking care of our complete infrastructure system. And that's where we started looking at the 50 to 100 years out. That's where we got the rate adjustments. That's where we started planning for doing the eventual replacements and growth and expansion. Egan's not going to do a lot of that, but a little bit. But no one's going to do anything, I think, appropriate unless we have a close to realistic, as good of an understanding as we can have to what the total cost is for our whole system. I'm going to throw this out as an example, and it's not meant to scare, but in reality, I like to go hunting. I like to go grouse hunting. Reamer outing area. I'm not going to tell you where I go hunting specifically, but my concern is that 20 years from now, Reamer may not be there.
Mhm.
Outing may not be there.
Better be my cabin.
Because they don't have, well, and so, but I know that there's gonna have to be some tough decisions made. And I think I think it's gonna be really valuable to have a prioritized list or criteria of how you make those decisions. Part of the priorities that we're using in Egan now for when do we replace and what pipes are replaced first? Well, we don't have a hospital in town, but we have the high school that's going to be our shelter, if there's an emergency situation. So we're going to ensure that the roads to our high school don't flood in that 100-year, 1,000-year storm.
Hmm.
You know, if that's the emergency shelter, well, everybody needs to get there, you know? And if that's needs to be providing water, I'm gonna make sure that those water pipes are getting replaced first. So, you know, there's a whole lot of prioritization that needs to go on in order to make things be successful. And not everybody, you know, not everyone's gonna be prioritized. I mean, just like police and fire are prioritized over public works. I get that, and we're gonna work to serve police and fire, you know, and they're gonna get that $1 million fire truck before, you know, we get the snowplow, as long as the snowplow can, you know, keep the older snowplow can clear the road still. But I think that could be the huge value that this group could provide. And then you talked about geographic information system, GIS. That is our backbone of our asset management system. So you talked about having a portal, having something online. I mean, that's the biggest tool that we use for our asset management system. Is GIS.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that GIS, is it like you all have your own system?
So Esri's a provider for GIS, and they're the biggest provider, I think, realistically now the only one. I used to use one a long time ago,
Okay.
a different one, but it's a powerful tool. It's a really powerful tool. There's a lot of different asset management softwares that will work off Esri, but Esri's like the mapping base, you know, program, and then you have all these other asset management tools. But we're very fortunate. Again, we have great GIS staff, and so they created something that's our frontline workers will use. And so our best utilization of our asset management system is having everybody use it from top to bottom. So we're just using that.
And with that though, you know, you have to think about the townships and the cities, the smaller cities that don't have a lot of or resources to manage the assets they have. There's a huge cost for Esri. So whatever we do has to be scalable and affordable.
When it comes to that GPS, like in smaller communities, in our firm that I work for, we've got a lot of those mapped in GPS. But you see, you start tagging all those different layers, like when was the sewer built here? When was the road built there? So that you got management, you can say, well, golly, these streets over here are gonna need replacement in 2040. I mean, so all those things really play into asset management. And without that, it's hard to get your arms around them. And just going back to smaller communities, and Russ alluded to it, and I compliment your community about raising your rate structure. Many small communities never raised it a dime for 20, 30, 40 years because Aunt Heather didn't like it. They became so local, they became so community-based, they couldn't see the fact that 50 years from now, their wastewater plant's gonna be out of date. And so, you know, that's not having forward thinking. And that's what's happened in many of the small communities. If they'd raised a dime a month for every user over the last 40 years, they'd have enough money to buy that new wastewater plant or that fire truck or whatever. They didn't. And that has to do with educating people about the needs moving forward. We're not the same today that we were 20 years ago or even 10 years ago.
We have an online comment, Member Mackey.
Thank you. I think, Sarah, to your point, when you were asking the question about, you know, what are the agencies? I think the hard part, at least for me as a public service servant and also working in other agencies, is feeling like we're being pinned against each other. And so I will just say an example, you know, for our projects, we need to do environmental assessments, and we work with SHPO or we work with the DNR. And sometimes things are not as they always were in the past for many reasons. And, you know, not to put blame on us, not to put blame on them, but I think because of ever-changing guidance and ever-changing policies and internal people, humans, interpreting things and understanding things differently, that it does sometimes feel like we're being pinned against each other as state agencies instead of having, like the one person said, sort of a priority list so that we know that, you know, broadband is priority and we're going to have to work blah, 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 blah to get, to achieve the goal and have some, direction. And if it's, if it's whatever it is, like I just use broadband because that's me. But I think that's where we as state agencies are trying to guide, in my case, ISP is on what the rules are going to be. And if we aren't always collaboratively working together as we are really trying to do, and I'm not saying that this isn't working, I'm just saying that it does feel sometimes that there isn't a statewide priority, and it would be nice to have that.
I agree. So kind of working backwards then. Oh, go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that I've been thinking about with the conversation here is that, and a couple of words came out, jumped out at me. One is the education.
Mhm.
We need to be sure that people are understanding what what the threats are to our plans. And also we need to know when we've gotten stuck into tunnel vision.
Mhm.
Because too often we get into an idea and that's the only thing that matters to us. And my experience, retired from 3M, that we used to at 3M evaluate products a lot. The new product, what's wrong with it? Why isn't it going to be successful? What do we do with it when it's going to be we're going to be going into a harvest mode? All of that sort of thing. And in Egan, we I can't say that we've made mistakes, but we have Thomson Reuters, a big campus that's for sale. We have Blue Cross Blue Shield, a big campus that's for sale. A lot of this is because people can work from home. And, it wasn't that many years ago that no one could do that. There's, just when we talk about schools, there was a period when we were computerizing every office and every school room. And those computers all plugged in and they used a certain amount of power. And so we had to pass a referendum to fund increasing the power in our school district, in the buildings. Well, now we have, small devices that you can charge at home. You can do just as much work on them. We have LED lights. We have all of that. So we didn't need the power, but we needed it at the time, but now we don't need it. We needed the office space at the time, but now we don't need it. We were actually going to add 2,000 jobs, and there was a huge amount of space to Thomson Reuters back in 2007. And when they merged with Reuters, that all went away. And now that, those buildings are up for sale with the exception.
Sounds like you have a perfect site for some development to come
Yeah.
in.
Well, and then, and then on the other hand, we've got Rosemount that Meta is coming there with a big development. They say that they're going to invest $500 million in their site there in Rosemount. Russ and I, we had a task that we were trying to promote with street funding. And we were trying to match what St. Paul did, and that was to provide a contribution from all properties into a street fund so that we would have funds to be able to improve streets. Now, one of the things that came up in that discussion is that, hey, we have a lot of nonprofit space in St. Paul, nonprofit, the Capitol, the churches, the museums, all of that, they don't pay taxes. And so what are we going to do? Are we going to try to charge them taxes? And we actually thought that maybe we could do that, but then we find out that that's unconstitutional. And we're still trying to figure out a way to do that, to be able to supply good streets to the nonprofits as well as the residents. And I think now we've got a little bit of a different solution in St. Paul, and that's a sales tax. but we still have a lot of places that don't have the ability to raise money for their streets that are within their communities. And, you know, the big metro areas can contribute because we do sell a lot of gasoline that's taxed. And so we can share that with others. And I think that that's something that we need to have that, an oversight that says, oh, wait a second, this is a dumb idea. You put in too many irrigation devices, and then what you're doing is you're lowering your water table too much. You're going into, you know, the water that you have to save for the future. You put in too many factory farms without treatment, and then you have nitrates that come up. And so now you have to do something to take care of the nitrates that are in your residential water. You know, we have to have the people that have experience to be able to give us some advice on when we might want to think about something else. We don't want to stop it, but we want to have that ability to give advice.
Or identifying issues that they might not even realize. I think,
Exactly.
you know, like I keep going back to the Mustinky River and, you know, in the 1900s, they go and they straight ditch all of these. And, you know, at that time, that's what you did. But now we're going back and realizing that that's not the best thing. It causes more problems downriver. And so if we start, you know, figuring out how to stop the problems upriver, then it's beneficial for everybody downstream. And so I think one of the things that, you know, with this, I'm kind of looking at these, you know, task force discussion things, and it sounds like, you know, we're kind of coming to a conclusion around what some of the strategic initiatives should be, like the mapping, the GIS, I think the priorities and the education piece. I think so much of that is going to guide the work. And, you know, we don't really necessarily have to come up with what the work is going to be. But I think for us, it's really important to come up with kind of some of those priorities, or, you know, give that as a direction to this council. You know, what are our strategic priorities for, you know, making sure our infrastructure is completely, you know, not going to be disrupted for large amounts of time. But I really think, you know, some of those, some of like who should be included as voting and non-voting members or governance and stuff might come a little bit later in the process. As far as, I think this is a really good idea of like who we need to be at the table. And so those are some of my thoughts right now. Does anybody have any? Go ahead, Dawn.
So I just like what you were talking about, Senator Jim, about, you know, these big commercial spaces that are empty. Okay, I mean, you can think about several around here as well that are empty, but I'd also be curious then to get information in this portal on just migration, or, you know, people coming in. You know, you think about tax base, your taxpayers, you know, folks that are coming in. And then, you know, if there's big booming areas, but, you know, and where's the tax base at, things like that. I don't know. I think it'd be really good to get information and then how people are migrating out of Minnesota. And same with businesses, you know, if that's through commerce, or, you know, figuring out like who's, you know, which businesses are leaving. And then, because that also affects the money. It affects, you know, what we can and can't do, because we can all have pipe dreams here. I don't know what, but people have to pay for it, and any future generations. And I really think looking ahead already with people that are experts in the field, that are doing the work, that have paid positions, that are already, you know, contracted in for cities, different things, you know, they're already doing the work. And it's just figuring out a way to collaborate those ideas and being realistic on who and what do we want to pass on to next generations, planning for them, but also like planning on how do we not, you know, put the burden and debt on them for the future as well. And so I absolutely, the business model of going 10 cents on your bill now may actually be this much in the future. Like, you know, there's, yeah, I think about
It's the transparency piece.
Yeah, I think it's transparency. It's about investment in the future and understanding. And, you know, again, sometimes it doesn't matter about what our priorities are, but it's the, you know, the priorities of the community and but it's also, you know, putting some money behind that. And going, wow, if there's some, and again, I can't remember which, information it was like in the statute or, you know, what this task force was gonna do. It talked about, oh, I wish I had it in front of me. Just, you know, areas of need. It might look different. You know, it may be a greater Minnesota, it might not just be an inner city area that was. I was just trying to look at the verbiage, so I wouldn't mess it up, but I'll let that be. But I think, you know, understanding population and so I don't know if that's a group of people, if it's just getting information from cities.
Well, the Department of Commerce, I think, can track a lot of those things that you
Yeah,
just
that's what I was thinking.
brought up regarding population trends,
And the
different demographics of where people settle.
Yeah.
And, you know, let's face it, our population is going up. It's not going down. So the need for more development, the more housing, more apartments, more,
Childcare.
it's always gonna be going up. So those development areas are gonna, they're always gonna occur in your major metropolitan areas. Maybe not out by Kensington, Minnesota, you know.
I don't know, those rune stones, they can attract people.
Oh, yeah, well, I know all about those.
I took a vacation to Kensington last summer.
What about, as an objective, and I don't really know how to word it, but somehow providing resourcing to help those to help jurisdictions do planning,
Yep.
right? That can't necessarily do it on their own because they don't have the resources
Mhm.
to do it. I don't know what that looks like, if it's a team of experts that can go out and do the GIS out in other areas, if it's a,
Mhm.
you know,
Mm.
contracting for it, I don't know.
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I'd agree with Brian, and I'll share this example. Minneapolis had college kids and gave them bicycles, and they went out with iPads. And they went and measured all their pedestrian ramps and that was data collection that they were doing to see what met ADA standards and what didn't. So
Yeah.
likewise, in the summertime, we hire college kids and they run out there with the GPS units and they're shooting our manholes and our,
Well, I don't remember, one of you mentioned, university, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Well, Minskew, not the U, but Minskew has got campuses all over the state.
Mhm.
And there's potential there to do the same sort of a thing, maybe not on bicycles, because, I mean,
Well,
a
and
lot of those campuses are a long way away from where you need to get to, but, you know.
that was exactly like the kind of impetus for this was just hearing from Minnesota Council of Counties and Cities and what did we hear from Scott County? What did they applied for a grant like 6 times, and each time they went to apply for it, it was $30,000 in consultants fees and all that. And so like that seems like a waste of our resources as well, because we're then, paying our taxpayer dollars to have somebody, write a grant for us over and over again. When if we could,
Some of your state colleges
yeah,
might have that.
or it just,
right?
use those resources in a better way where instead of like every time, you guys need to hire a consultant, it's like, there's an organization or an agency or whatever that is there to help with the, finding if what you qualify for, what is the grant looking for, writing the grant, complying with the grant, because if anybody's ever gotten a federal grant, complying with it is almost as much work, is probably more work than anything
Audit.
else.
And the eventual audit.
Yeah, and the audit. And so like, when you talk about a city like, I'm Longville, for instance, that they don't have that resources. Even in my district, Hilltop has 900 people. The entire city is like, I think 60% of the city is in mobile homes. And so we have, one person who is the city administrator, the HR specialist, the, public works director. And if she, and I know that they need a tornado shelter for their community. So now they're coming to us and being like, we need a tornado, you know, where if maybe there was a spot where they could go and find places like, yeah, like you.
Mitigation planning for that.
All right, I might have, let's touch base after this.
Okay.
We have a tornado shelter in our city that's not ADA compliant with 66% of the population in mobile homes, so I think it's a big deal, but anyway. So I really like that idea of being like that kind of, I think there's two parts of it though, where it's like, we as a state have goals. And we want to make sure that all of our local and municipals and utilities and asset managers are working towards our state goals. And then, but we want to make sure also that like these programs or projects, I think about in my community, we have a pond at the end of our street that anytime it floods, you know, the whole block is now a lake. And, you know, and that's the one part where, you know, we all know we'll go sit down there, drive the trucks and see how fast, how big we can get the, you know, waves up. I'm sure my public works director loves that. I hear you. But you know, that was fixed. It was one of those points where our city came in and fixed it because it was a community thing that we came up and said, hey, this is a problem. Right now, we're in the midst of getting sidewalks in our neighborhood because the city council didn't put it in their plan. And so our community members said, hey, we want sidewalks. And, you know, how do we make sure that the community goals and the state vision are aligning, I guess.
I just want to say one other thing too. So I think sometimes the legislature, we can be the biggest roadblock to a lot of.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just gonna own it. I'm brand new at this, but I can say this from my observation. I think we can be a huge roadblock and it, you know, again, we can have these hearings and we can have, you know, a minute and a half testifiers just trying to plead. So I think for us at the legislature and in the Senate, I think we need to honestly be really real about before we're saying, yes, let's just send this to the omnibus bill or let's send this through. I'll just use an example quick of Excel Energy. Okay.
That's a good one.
Okay, okay, I'll just use this as a quick example of something that I just, you know, of a statute that happened. If somebody wants to have solar or different things added to their home, there's a new statute, I don't know when it was adopted, you know, in the last several years, that if a homeowner wanted to get solar, that would bump the project up on the list of where things were at with projects. So now currently there's a business in my district that has a transformer just sitting somewhere in California. But it kind of got bumped because of some of the statutes that happened. And I'm not trying to pass the buck or blame, or I'm just saying we have to be cognizant in the legislature. And I want to just take that up, that I could have, you know, more of a relationship now with Chair Cagle across the aisle and go, hey, if I heard this is coming into this hearing, can we talk about this? Because this might impact something else. And we just have to think about, you know, the whole state and how things could impact things and how we could care for Minnesota better. And I think it's about being cautious of what we put into statute. And honestly, like, understand that I know more people here sitting around this table that are experts in your field. And I might quickly go, hey, this is can we talk about this or help me understand what's a good question to ask? Because we might have a little bit more fortitude to ask questions versus the testifiers. So I get excited about this because I think about, it's not about how much money we can spend or what we can do, but it's about communication and how we can hopefully lock arms to help make things easier for Minnesotans, not only on their pocketbooks, but also be excited about what, and I've noticed that certain entities have a strong pull here. And I just think, again, how can we look at it more from a different lens, you know, and seeing things from different perspectives on how it can impact, you know, again, tax base, getting businesses into Minnesota. And if a company is getting bumped down the road, they're going to maybe go to North Dakota They might say, hey, my project's gonna get done faster. We're gonna just take our whole project and we're gonna move it here. And that's what I get, you know, a little bit more, like, how can we attract things in, you know, ethically and.
And then you have I'm just thinking too about the workforce issue as well and how like all of that plays into it too, but that might be a different task
Well,
force.
it is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's where I think like where we can have a more solid infrastructure system, have more site development or, you know, communities ready to take on some of these projects, then we're gonna, the next big thing is then gonna be the workers and how do we make sure that we're, getting those workers here as well, so.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Could I just ask a quick question? Do we have representation in this group from the, and I don't remember what it's called, the League of Counties or the counties, whatever? Okay,
I'll see.
yeah, AMC is on it, I believe.
okay.
We have somebody from AMC.
We haven't
and-
talked much about the counties, but they are huge in this,
Yeah.
in this thing.
General contractor. Thought we did.
Clay.
Oh, yeah, we
Clay
did have the
County.
Clay guy. Yep.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, yeah, the,
Paul
coun-
Craven hopped, and he's just not here today.
Okay,
so I think, yeah, I mean. I think the main thing is that these have to be community led with collaboration across. And so. Sean, you haven't said anything down there. I'm gonna pick on you.
No, I don't have anything to add in particular, other than Minnesota Management and Budget is sort of you know, catch-all, help sort of facilitate the budget process. We're ready to work closely, primarily with state agencies, but also kind of within the executive branch to coordinate statewide proposals. So that might be a
Has
potential
the infrastructure coordinator been brought on yet at MMB?
at MMB. No,
Okay, do you know when that position will be brought on?
I think it's been open for a while, so I think there's a potential to be soon, but I don't have any.
Okay, I think once that person's hired on, I'd like them to be a part of this conversation as well.
Certainly.
Because I think that's one of the, I know one of the questions that came through earlier was, you know, is that something that the state can do as far as kind of this broader overarching thing, and I think that's really where that was kind of the idea through session. It was just, we ended up piecemealing it a bit. And so there's the infrastructure coordinator that's gonna be housed at MMB, really dealing with IRA, IIJA and CHIPS, but then what's come down the pike here, we don't know what's gonna be the next, you know, maybe it's some sort of, I don't know, I'm not even gonna say stuff out loud. And then, and so we wanna make sure that whatever funding sources are coming down the pike, that we're able to be malleable to them and shift and adapt to whatever those funding sources are. And so that's kind of my, any other, I feel like we're kind of hitting a wall here. I don't know. Does anybody else feel that way? I feel like I'm talking way too much.
One of the things that I was thinking, of, you know, what we've been talking about is primarily spending.
Mhm.
And, you know, there are people that really don't want to spend anything. But really what they want is they want to understand the return on investment.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the things that we need to be sure that we acknowledge, that there's a return on investment for everything. You know, for the townships, you know, when we invest there, what's the return? For the metropolitan area, what's the return? And so that we have these kinds of expenditures clearly in our mind, which might be priority, which might be nice to have. You know, I mean, we've always talked about wants versus needs, things like that. And I think knowing what the return on investment is really important to us to be able to put these expenditures into the proper context. Because, you know, again, we've been talking about spending money and needing resources and all of those kinds of things. And that's not the only side of these kinds of discussions.
Yeah.
There's one thing that there's kind of a cliche that we use, and that is the health, safety and welfare of the general public. And really, that's kind of what we're up to.
Mhm.
And I think we're kind of working in that direction. Looking at funding needs for wastewater or whatever it might be, highways. So, I think that's part of our mission statement is health, safety and welfare.
Chicago, when you talk about the infrastructure manager, is that what the position is, or?
Yeah, it'll be sort of an infrastructure manager, federal funds coordinator type position that will have a small team at MMB.
So having like a GIS type setup where all the different communities are inputting, what they have as as needs. I mean, they've got all their infrastructure in there, so there can be a prioritization of what pops up, on that, and that's what GIS does. It crosses over, our road improvements and the ages and stuff and the needs for the pavement condition index. And same thing, we're trying to do the same thing with our utilities as well. So that's going to kind of highlight where our needs are for doing projects. But, if
And
a
the
person would have
priorities.
access to that from the whole state, from not just public perspectives, but private entities as well, and be able to do a crossover and look and say, hey, this would be a prime opportunity for us to put money in, right
Yeah.
here, or, and maybe not all those, and maybe then accommodate or work with someone from this group to get those local communities to the point where they can, be prepared,
Yep. Yeah.
and have those projects. And maybe MnDOT takes the lead in one instance, and maybe, we're taking the lead on a MnDOT project right now.
Mhm.
It went, MnDOT didn't have the time, so then the county was gonna do it, the county didn't have the time, so now Egan volunteered,
That's how 65 is with Blaine too.
Okay.
Blaine's the one taking the lead on that one.
So that happens.
Yeah.
And that works.
Right.
So,
And they're community led.
but that's a great tool.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's where I'm kind of thinking about like how some of these things that we piecemealed over the session, like the infrastructure coordinator position and the small communities program at the U, we gave a little bit of money to that. But then like thinking about how all of you guys have all of your data out there and like, how are we sharing that? How is it being managed and merged? And so I don't know, would it be helpful to this group to have the University of Minnesota, it was the Humphrey Institute that's putting together this small communities plan? If I could have Kyle Shelton, who's the director of that program, come in and present on where they are with that project and what their future plans are for that. If that would be helpful, that might be something that we can look at as a council of scaling up as well. If you guys, yes? Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's doing some good work.
Yeah, Kyle and Queen. Yeah, I mean, the Center for Transportation Studies has been, really good with us on working collaboratively. And then that's really where we got in with like the School of Design too, down out of Mankato and I think Mankato, I don't know. But there are so many, the thing is, so much of this work is already being done. It's just being done separately from each other. I look at the Green Step Cities and how, that program is helping cities reduce their impact, not just, on climate, but also in their pocketbooks. I mean, think of Hackensack, Minnesota as a Green Step City. Not necessarily a bastion of environmentalists or, tree huggers up there, but it's because it makes sense. It makes sense. It saves money and reduces their impact. And so that's really where I think, so what else would be helpful for this group?
Well, I think, infrastructure, what I envision is, in my world, is a certain concept. But we as a group, of course, what is infrastructure? And I happen to just see something here. Would the task force include food and agricultural infrastructure? Well, I never even thought of that, and so, how big is infrastructure? Have we really defined it? I mean, I know a lot of agencies support it in different ways, and I think that's it's got to be managed that way, but I'm not sure I understand totally what infrastructure is. It's a big area.
Mm-hmm. I mean, everything from housing.
I think we need to kind of get our handle on that, at least as best we can.
Right. Bring in our focus a bit.
bring our focus in some manner. Otherwise, we're just gonna be kind of blowing in the wind, I think.
I think when I think about the infrastructure, I'm thinking built infrastructure. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing there. I mean, is it's everything.
Well, you take like, for instance, public utilities, gas, telephone, internet. There's just so many different entities, so many different ownerships and you know, and I can appreciate some of the things that were brought out regarding the Michigan and how they tried to, you know, fold those in, but ooh, that's a big task.
Yeah, and I know Michigan has like its transportation, water and their management and budget that makes up kind of their three pillars of it. But yeah, I mean, I think food security is a big thing.
It is.
Kind of thinking
It
about
is.
back to your school. So like, maybe we, you know, what is the one thing that we can think of that like a school, what do we need to operate a school? Water, food, electricity, yeah, transportation, staff, yeah. Angels. But I mean, I think maybe, you know, just thinking about like a common point and like what, or a grocery store, or, you know, like what is that one thing that in our community we all need? And so, yeah, I think about it as food, water, housing, transport, and I don't even know if transportation, electricity, broadband, landlines. I think we can discuss that.
Well, I think it's the basic framework. It's the foundation.
Yeah,
Infrastructure is like, it's a foundation. So, and everything can be built from that, just simply.
yeah, so maybe we want to focus on some main pieces or, but I kind of like that idea of everything that's in a school. Children are not infrastructure though. Any other thought? I don't know. Do you guys feel like we got something out of this? I feel like I'm rambling a lot. Yeah, Laura.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Laura Ziegler at the AGC. I think the other thing that I'm thinking about is what we are not trying to
Yes.
be. And it sounds like we are not trying to be a regulatory body.
No.
And that perhaps is important to, we don't necessarily need to have it as part of the mission that we are not this. But it's going to be, part of that is then you're not going to have mandates as part of this.
Yes.
It's going to be incentive-based communication and that the outcomes would essentially sell themselves that you're trying to achieve.
Yep, I think that's.
I'm
spot
hearing
on.
that right?
Yep.
And I think that's important because everyone here and not here, but is named on the council, it's going to be based on those relationships with their members to get the buy-in if it's not in any way quote required. And I am in no way advocating for it to be a regulatory body because we have those agencies and I know you're not either. But I think that's important because it's only going to be as good as the participation and the inputs that are put into it and those resources and the education. So it is going to be reliant upon those of us
Yeah.
here and
Well,
outside.
And I think that's like one of the only ways to really make this stuff work is you know, that's how you get the buy-in. That's how you get people coming along versus like forcing them. And so, that's exactly right. This is voluntary, non-regulatory, and I'd like to make it as non-political as possible as well. Which is hard because everything's political.
No. I don't buy that.
I try not to make it, but, yeah, I think that's a really good point. Non-regulatory, non-mandating, all that kind of stuff, so.
I think that needs to go. We need to go back to the mission statement.
Yeah.
Have you done the mission statement yet?
I've been just collecting kind of, notes, and so I, like, one of the things that I, so like mission statement, I'm thinking, you know, maybe we come back with kind of some of these notes and see if we can like come together and offer some kind of mission statements out there. Next meeting, we can maybe dive through some of these notes and figure out like which some of the strategic initiatives we would want to maybe like ask this council to adopt. And then I can also invite Kyle Shelton, from Humphrey to kind of give us an update on their small communities program, where they are on that and how they envision it. Cause I really see that as a tool that we could upscale as well to help get some of your townships help and driving some of those township roads this weekend. Yes, like they need help.
Well, something that legislature needs to adopt, I mean, seriously.
Just for maintenance,
Yeah.
maintenance of.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's mostly private.
When you look at the price of aggregate, went from $5 a ton to $25 a ton in the course of not too many years. That's a big impact. That's huge.
Well, doesn't Wisconsin pave every single road they have?
Yeah, see, they have a mechanism in Wisconsin where the state legislature funds the townships to pave all the roads. Well,
Minnesota's got the
that's
fourth,
not a bad gig.
we've got the fourth largest.
294,000
Pardon?
miles. Do we have 294,000 miles of township roads? Or is it just
Oh,
roads?
I
in
think it's
general?
more like 500 and some thousand.
We have the fourth largest road network in the country. So California, Texas, Illinois, Minnesota.
All serious.
Yeah. And then if you look too on, and then the agriculture overlay of where a lot of, the grain belt and how much of the soil and farmable land is in Minnesota, is very, very key to the entire country. And so, we're really
Food supply,
special.
Food supply.
We're super special. And we also have, we have the headwaters of the Mississippi, but then we also have the Red River Valley. And so not only are we hitting the Gulf, but we're also hitting the Hudson. And so we're at this like really cool spot where everything we do affects everybody in the world and we're just really important.
Mhm.
So, but I think that's one of the things that, we really need to think about is, how does the farming practices in Mankato affect folks down in New Orleans or, in Fargo, in Winnipeg? Because that's who we're, that's where all of our stuff is going.
I have a question. Do we have the railroad represented here?
We do
Because,
But.
I just came out of Wyoming and South Dakota yesterday, or actually Sunday, and I mean, the rail network up there is just unreal. But you see, everything that goes out Burlington Northern out of here ends up in Seattle.
Yeah.
And that's where all those containers come in.
Mhm.
They come right from Seattle to Walmart or wherever.
Well, MnDOT does have an office of rail within MnDOT. And so,
Yeah,
You know,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm not saying we're not
Right.
represented. I'm just wondering what
yes,
impact do they have here around infrastructure?
that's a good point.
Yeah, and we certainly don't own those. Those are privately owned.
Right,
You know, it's a
exactly.
network that's.
And I think
completely
that's
separate.
so that's one of the barriers too, that we have to overcome is this public-private partnership of our utilities. And there are public entities that own things that are used for the public good. And so, how do we make sure that those lines of communication are always open as well? And that we're communicating the state's vision and helping that align with the company's vision as much as possible and not being an impediment to development and advancement, but being there, hopefully helping along as well.
Well, the railroads have got sovereign rights because go and get a permit to cross a railroad next month. You'll get it 2 years from now.
I know.
And I mean,
And make
it's,
promises too.
it's, they don't know what hurry up is.
Yeah,
And they
Well, and
have their own clock.
that's a good point too, because with a lot of IIJA and IRA putting money behind, building capacity for rail, that maybe is somebody that should be at the table. Yeah, go ahead online, free.
I'm sorry, just kind of back to your next step question and just want to reiterate, I think what Jessica had brought up earlier is if we want to do asset mapping or statutory mapping and all of the things, we might want to consider that sooner than later. As we all know, the RFP process takes a long time if that's the avenue, or if we're going to all sort of do this collectively and somebody's going to be in charge of putting it all together. But I do think that that's a really important piece of this work.
Well, and I think my goal is to, whatever this group, we're gonna have a report to the legislature, but my goal is really to figure out, what this group needs and then bring that as an ask to the legislature. So whether it's, funding to start the GIS system or, set up some sort of whatever this group recommends, I'm gonna bring that to the legislature and ask for us to get that done. Or maybe we'll make Don do it. But that's the goal. Jim?
I'm thinking of some of the things that are really unknown, like what's the future of some parts of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks ago, I was in Phoenix and was able to
The automated
ride
driving.
in the automated Waymo cars.
Yeah.
I found that, first of all, I was somewhat skeptical, and I wound up being a supporter of it.
Think they can
And-
drive on ice?
Pardon me?
Can they drive on ice?
Oh, I'm sure they can. Yeah, I'm sure.
Well.
They can do anything.
85.
Really?
We're, yeah, and we're behind the rest of the nation,
Yeah.
many states in allowing the experimental, what they do is they put out plots and then they program those plots. And, you can call a Waymo just like you can call an Uber or a Lyft, but there's nobody behind the steering wheel. And it was amazing to me how sophisticated their software is. It's incredible. And they use LiDAR so that they can see around corners. They can anticipate what's coming from a 90-degree street even. But that, and then I think about, we didn't have cell phones not that long ago that had picture ability and navigating ability, and you can find almost anything out
It
there.
was a phone.
And I looked just a minute ago and a plane just went over the Capitol here that was coming from New York, coming to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I could see when it took off, when it's landing, and what kind of a plane it is, who's flying it, and all of those kinds of things, which, it's data that is now being collected and publicly available. And then I think about drones, and that drones are now used in, we have a drone that came through the Capitol last spring, filming a commercial.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I did talk to somebody from Amazon once, and they asked them if they were putting helipads on the tops of the Amazon warehouses, and he said, well, no, but we are planning to put drone landing spots on.
Mm-hmm.
So they're waiting for legislation to come through that allows drone to deliver their products. And, you think about that a little bit more, and drones are so precisely controlled that I think we saw it in the last few years, even multiple drones up in the sky making
Like fireworks. displays and
some
stuff.
kinds of images. And so, this is where we're at today. And I dare anyone to try to predict what's going to be there 2 years from now.
Right, and I think that's the point, like where we have to make sure that this is a flexible, whatever it is, it's flexible and it can continue to adapt and meet the needs of the future.
Mhm.
Cause I don't know, like when the teleporters start coming up, how are we gonna make sure that we're not getting mixed up with other people's? Sorry.
So what that speaks to is another piece of infrastructure, that's airspace. Who controls,
Yes.
FAA controls it from the ground up, depending on where you are.
Mm-hmm. And MnDOT has some stuff in there too as well, right?
Yeah,
Well-
we've been doing some work and it's slowed over the past couple of years, I think, but looking at advanced air mobility and putting together a statewide plan on what that might look like in the future.
Well, and then you probably have to bring in emergency services and FEMA and stuff in case plans for what it's gonna look like if it goes wrong. Type of stuff. So much fun stuff we get to think about, huh? All right, my brain's fried for the day. How about you guys? But I think this is a good start. So what I would, will do is we'll kind of come back and put together maybe a mission statement or take the conversation that we heard and do some sort of draft along with some of the key points that we talked about, what could be some of the first strategic things that we would want to recommend to the legislature. And then we'll have the U come in, and who else did I say?
And then who would we get for mapping? Like when they're talking about mapping, would we bring someone in to help with that? Is that what they were suggesting?
Well, I know with the Michigan Council, they contracted with a Canadian company to do all the GIS mapping. Well,
Are
Is
you
that the
looking
mapping
for
they're talking?
information about how that works?
Or were they talking about mapping out the direction of this? That's what I was confused about.
Oh,
Bree and,
the commerce.
yes, I was just curious. I forgot. Thank
Jessica,
you,
yeah.
Jessica.
Jessica Burdette here.
Yes. I just want to go back to that.
Yeah, so I wasn't thinking in terms of like mapping assets, but rather maybe thinking about mapping processes, who's who, the different layers of decision making.
Yes.
And one of the things that I have in the back of my mind is a number of years ago, the Department of Administration went through a process using their continuous improvement group to evaluate how the state was working to achieve its enterprise sustainability goals, water, greenhouse gas reductions, infrastructure investments, things like that. And there were a lot of different agencies, that had different pieces of it. There were different interagency work groups, and it all started feeling like everybody was very busy doing a lot of things with very full plates, and not a lot of direction or understanding of how things actually got done. And so there's something about this conversation that feels very familiar. The gentleman who brought up rail just a few minutes ago, there's a couple of, yes, MnDOT has their rail group. There's also an interagency rail working group, and other things like that going on. And I suspect that while we have a breadth of knowledge here and a depth of knowledge here around the table today, we probably also have some blind spots here and don't fully understand how all of us interact with one another. So my suggestion wasn't necessarily about like mapping pipes or light bulbs or anything like that, but rather processes for getting things done, gap analysis. I very much hear the anecdotes of history to where we are today, and all of the gaps and things that have occurred that have led to maybe a deficit in being able to upkeep our systems and to invest in our systems. But I suspect we don't all understand, the full deficit or where all of the barriers are to achieving an end. It's not just we don't have enough money. There's also, other limitations. I'll digress, but that probably clarifies the question.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I was thinking that you meant
All right, great.
by
Thank
that,
you.
and I appreciate that. Cool. I think that's really important.
Any final thoughts from anyone? I hope you guys found this valuable. I did. It was for me. I know I have lots of ideas going back as far as when it comes down to our achievements for this and kind of what we want to present to the legislature. And so I think that it's been helpful. Thank you all for being here. And our next meeting, then we will work on getting that presentation from the U and some other things that we had talked about. So. All right, thank you all. I will adjourn this meeting. Okay, right? I don't know if that's useful or helpful, or I'm kind of like leading.
No, I'm not.
Okay.